The video game I have been playing is from Acid Nerve, the people who brought you Titan Souls. And, ooh, what a video game. I've been playing Death's Door. This is an isometric action-adventure. It's a game that has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It's not linear. I'll talk about that in a moment. But I wanted to hammer home the fact that this isn't a roguelite/roguelike with procedurally generated worlds. It's all handcrafted. For some reason, it appears that some people think that this is roguish.
I guess because if you were to glimpse it, you might think, oh, it's like a Hades type thing.
Maybe. So, like, if you're one of the people that thinks that, then don't, because it's not. How this actually does work, generally speaking, you go into a world that's made up of 3 or 4 connected levels, hacking and slashing at all the baddies and solving puzzles and exploring areas for secrets. And this often all leads up to these big and challenging boss battles. In fact, the two games that Death's Door most resembles are Dark Souls and The Legend of Zelda.
That's what everyone says about every game.
Well, I'll give you reasonings why these resemble these, right? So, like, Dark Souls, it has these humongous bosses that at first seem unbeatable, but, you figure out their tells and you get used to them. When you kill enemies, you get their souls, and then you use that currency to upgrade your strength, your speed, etc.
Okay, that is quite Dark Soulsy, he says begrudgingly.
And each level, well, I shouldn't say each level, but a lot of the levels, you pick away at them, opening doors and revealing passageways that will often loop you back around to the beginning, so that when you die, you can take the shorter route to get to where you need to get to. Do you follow?
Mm-hmm.
Now, when it comes to Zelda, there are a lot of dungeon-like levels, and you acquire abilities at the end of them, 4 by game's end. And these will complement your weapon in combat, but they're also pivotal for when it comes to solving environmental puzzles.
Right.
You have a fireball, and that's necessary to light these large lanterns that are scattered about the place. Light a few and you'll reveal a secret door or whatever. There's also your bomb that will just annihilate your enemies, but it's also handy for breaking down these weak walls.
Classic bomb behaviour.
You have a grappling hook that you can fling yourself towards enemies, but it also to reach platforms, and you also have a crossbow, which is good for firing through the eyes of enemies, but also for flicking on switches from afar. And to go into the combat a little more, it is good. It's pretty straightforward. You have your melee weapon, 5 in total to collect, and they all have different characteristics. And you have those ranged abilities that I mentioned. But the thing is, there's a great balance at play here. You can't just spam these abilities. So how it works, unless you upgrade your ranged abilities through these, again, Zelda, these shrines that you find. There are also health shrines as well to bump up your health bar. But your ranged abilities work off this sort of 4 charges, 4 pips that you can see in the top left of the screen. So let's say you use the crossbow 4 times. Then your ranged ability bar will be totally empty. But you can then refill that by hitting enemies or other objects in the environment 4 times with the melee attack.
Right.
Because of that, you're constantly going back and forth between melee and ranged.
Yeah.
It is a terrific balance. Because, like, say, for example, like some of these bosses I've mentioned, and I'll go into them again in a while, but like there's absolutely massive bastards. And you're like, well, I'm going to keep my distance. I'm going to pop them with a few bombs from afar, but you can't. You have to get in the thick of it to refill your bomb bar and then, pull back, fling a couple of bombs at them. And getting into that groove, that fluidity, is an absolute joy. I think it is balanced wonderfully.
Yeah, it looks great. I can definitely see this sort of Zelda-ness in like some of the boss fighty stuff. I think
he's coming around now, I see.
No, it's good. That's good. When they showed the trailer for this with the more action earlier in E3, I thought, oh, actually, this does look like my jam.
I'm talking about how your abilities don't recharge, so now is as good a time to bring this up. Nothing regenerates in Death's Door, and that does include your health as well.
Right.
So how this works, to replenish your health, you have to first find a seed that is scattered about the place, and then you plant that in one of the pots that are also relatively plentiful. And then when you interact with that, you have full health. If you like, you can travel back to the hub area. There is a hub area, and then you can travel back to the level, and that will also give you full health. But then that will also respawn all the enemies that you've killed. So it is this dangerous game to play, but one that I often did. Because when I ended the game, I ended it with like 12 or 13 surplus seeds, which I probably wasn't meant to. But I guess that depends on how you play.
That's because you're such a pro.
Yeah, let's go with that. But I think that this is a very nice idea. I think it probably could have actually been more severe to have a bit more of an impact. But I don't know. Maybe I am just a pro, as Matthew said. I mean, I've kind of spoken about the combat, but I haven't actually mentioned the enemies, because there are complexities there as well. Combat, relatively straightforward. There are, kind of the balance of ranged and melee. But the enemies as well also introduce complexities, like the more hulking ones, they require a sort of a stick and move. There are other enemies that shoot out projectiles that you then yourself can deflect back at them.
Yeah, that's classic Zelda, lightning tennis.
Or back at other enemies that are in the area as well. And there are like environmental hazards that you can use to your advantage. So picking away at these enemies and recognizing tells and learning what projectiles are deflectable, because not all of them are. Oh, Matthew, what a thrill. Like, every new baddie is its own puzzle to an extent. Some more challenging than others, of course, like the bosses. Each boss, between the jigs and the reels, will take you about 3 to 5 minutes to kill in that run that you kill them. But getting to that point, or getting to that like level of skill or level of just power, I suppose, upgrading your character, like that's where it becomes a bit tougher. Like, this is a challenging game, and it definitely makes you work to succeed. But when you do, it is so satisfying. So to put the combat to one side, I mentioned the exploration, how levels open up. There's a decent amount of puzzling here, and lever pulling and switch pressing and etc, etc. So I wouldn't call this a Metroidvania. It's not like when you get these new abilities in one level, you're then stomping over to a previously locked door within that level. That's a bit more of a rarity, where the exploration comes into play and these newly acquired abilities. So you can travel back to levels that you had previously visited with these new abilities, and you can open up previously locked pathways. So like I mentioned, the bomb ability, like I think you get that in the second world, and then you can go back to the first world and you can smash in some of those weak walls. And when you do, you might find one of those soul orbs or a seed or whatever it is. So it's not so much about progressing through levels, it's about uncovering secrets in areas that you had once been. Again, it depends on your playstyle, but I loved going back to the areas I had been and kind of poking and prodding and figuring out what I had missed the first time around. I just love spotting areas of interest and making note of them for the future, because it's often that you come across a wall and you're like, right, can't get in there now, but just take a mental picture of where that was and I'll come back to it. That ties into the visuals a bit as well, or something that I wanted to mention about the visuals, because it's a very pretty game. The enemy design, and in particular the boss design, it straddles this fine line between cartoony, I suppose, and just a bit grotesque in some designs. The way shots are framed as well is really marvellous. Like, so you could be walking along this massive bridge, camera will pan out, and what this is, like, yeah, of course it's showing you a sense of scale, but it's also showing you little secrets in other areas, because you might see a little shimmering thing in a platform underneath. It just, again, this game is constantly urging you to interact with its systems, be that in combat or in exploration. Now, I suppose I haven't given you a reason for poking and prodding or going around this world. Like, this crow that you play as, you're essentially a Grim Reaper, but in this world there are loads of Grim Reapers, and you work at this place called the Hall of Doors, and these doors are gateways to different areas just in life, in the world. Your job is to enter a door, kill a creature who needs to be killed, and then go back to the hall and collect your paycheck and head away home. But your first job, obviously enough, doesn't go to plan, and you end up working with this grittier, kind of Clint Eastwood looking crow. He asks you to take down 3 bosses, and then you crack on from there. But one thing this game does when it comes to the bosses, or just when it comes to the whole thing actually, is it respects the idea of death. Like, it makes fun of death, but also it's quite somber at points as well. The melancholy will come when you defeat bosses, because rather than move on after you defeat one of the big bads, you're sort of witness to this little remembrance ceremony where a person called Steadhone, they have a headstone on their head, they act as the celebrant. And they say a few words about how this person was troubled or whatever. Or they might even be like, yeah, they weren't great, but they're still dead. So it has this air of respect and reverence for death. But it's also quite funny at times. Like, even when you die, death pops up on screen. And you hear this sort of more melodic Inception-like horn kind of thing. And I don't know why, but it tickled me quite a bit. But it's playful and silly in its humour as well. Like, I mentioned that Steadhone character, but there's another character you meet that has a pot on their head, and his name, Matthew, is...
Pothead.
Brian. No, yeah, Pothead. Of course it is Pothead. Or there's a bit where you're being read the riot act by a guard when a large frog drops from the sky and swallows said guard up its asshole. I don't just want to rattle off all the gags, but there's a character called Forest Mother that sends you out to look for her missing wind instrument, and when you find it, a box pops up on screen and it says, "You got the horn. Mother will be pleased." And she was. It's this game that's set in a fantastical world, but it grounds itself superbly in its respect for death, and which is something I suppose you don't see an awful lot in games. But also it's slapstick and charming, kind of even at times cringy humor. It's a lovely, lovely mix. Some not great things, it's not all perfect. I did have to grind a little, not loads, but I found an area where there were tons of spiders, and I kept going back occasionally if I wanted to get up to upgrade my character. Later on in the game, when you have the 4 magic ranged abilities, you have to switch between them using the D-pad, but also the combat is quite frantic, so you're trying to move your character with the left analog stick. That just gets a little fiddly, controlling the ranged abilities with the movement of the crow. And the opening up of worlds is often communicated well, and kind of soulsy, backtracking. There were definitely 1 or 2 occasions where I got a little lost. You don't have a map or anything here.
Right.
The second forestry area being one. Maybe it was just me, I don't know. But yeah, it didn't happen a ludicrous amount. But anyway, Matthew, despite those few little quibbles, I loved this game.
Oh, I can hear it.
Yeah, I didn't 100% it, but I upgraded 3 of my 4 weapons. I grabbed a decent chunk of the collectibles. My crow was super crow by the conclusion. I just lapped it up. I think it's brilliant. I think you should play it. I think the people at home should play it. It's cracking game.